Right. So today we're going deep on this book, Turning Point.
Oh, yeah.
Which tackles this whole idea of a crisis of modern masculinity.
Right.
It's one of those books that kind of throws a lot at you.
It does.
So we're going to try to like break it down.
Yeah.
Pull out some of the key arguments and evidence
For sure.
that he uses to support those arguments.
Yeah, the author really goes in.
Yeah.
He doesn't hold back.
No, he doesn't.
Gentle.
So for people who aren't familiar with the book,
Right. Yeah.
what would you say is like the core?
I think the core
Yeah.
premise is that there is this like crisis that men are facing.
Yeah.
And it's not just like individual struggles, you know?
Yeah.
He frames it as this like
A societal.
widespread
Yeah.
societal issue.
Yeah.
And he ties it back to how feminism has impacted men.
Okay.
You know, not just men themselves, but the spaces
Yeah.
that they used to occupy.
Like, I'm thinking of that anecdote he uses about the guy losing his male-only gym.
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect example.
Like, it's not just about
Right.
losing a place to work out.
Yeah.
It's about losing, like, this space where
Exactly.
traditional masculinity was, like,
Yeah.
accepted and celebrated.
It was okay to be like a man,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And that loss of male spaces is something he keeps coming back to
Yeah.
throughout the book.
So it's like the backdrop
It's
or everything else that he's talking about.
absolutely.
But he also goes deeper.
He does,
And that-
much deeper.
Like, he actually examines how
Wow.
feminism itself has evolved over time.
Yes.
And what he sees is, like, the negative consequences of that evolution.
He argues that it's gone from this movement for
Okay.
equality to something that has become hostile towards men.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
Like, what are some of the examples
So some of the examples
he
he
uses to support that
Yeah.
pretty strong claim?
He points to things like the Duluth model
Right.
for domestic violence, which he claims
Hmm.
systemically disadvantages men.
Right.
He brings up the idea of the feminization of education,
Yeah.
arguing that schools now prioritize emotional intelligence
Right.
over, you know, more traditional
Yeah.
academic skills,
Okay.
which he says might actually put boys at a disadvantage.
Interesting.
And then he also tackles the gender wage gap, calling it a myth
Okay.
that's been perpetuated by, you know, feminist narratives.
So he's really going after those,
He is
like, those hot button issues
yeah.
head on.
head on. He doesn't shy away from them at all.
And it's not just that he's critiquing those
Yeah.
specific
No,
policies or ideas.
right.
He actually ties this whole thing back to something bigger
He does.
that he calls the woke agenda,
The woke agenda.
and even links it to, you know, these
yeah.
broader philosophical
The critical theory.
movements like critical theory,
Yes, and the Frankfurt
the
School.
Frankfurt School.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really placing this
Yeah.
within like a
Within a larger
historical
ideological
an ideological context.
context. Exactly.
Okay, so for people who are hearing that term woke agenda for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
how would you kind of like
So he uses that term
sum up?
to describe what he sees as this like
Like-
movement to dismantle traditional Western values and
Ah.
hierarchies.
All right.
And he sees this as leading to societal decline.
Okay.
You know?
So it's not just theoretical for him?
No, it's not theoretical at all.
Right.
He sees this playing out in
Yeah.
real life.
In real world phenomena.
Yes, like cancel culture, which he claims silences
Mhm.
dissenting voices and creates a climate of fear around
Yeah.
challenging these ideas.
And he uses some pretty high profile examples like
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling,
Right.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson, people who faced a lot of backlash
Yeah.
for their views.
So it's like he's saying this is having real consequences.
Real consequences for real people. Exactly.
For individuals.
Yeah.
So he starts
He starts broad.
broad and then kind of like
Brings it down to
the individual level.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it seems like from there he goes even further and starts examining
it.
how this woke ideology
Right.
has impacted specific institutions.
Yes.
Starting with education.
Starting with education.
Yeah. He really goes in on
He does.
education system.
He does.
Doesn't he?
Yes.
Like, what are some of the key points?
So he claims that schools are becoming increasingly feminized.
Okay.
He argues that zero tolerance policies
Mhm.
often disproportionately punish boys,
Okay.
and that the curriculum changes that have happened
Right.
have really neglected boys' specific needs and learning styles.
So he's not just talking about abstract ideas.
No, he's talking about
Yeah.
the actual lived experiences of boys.
He's saying this is having consequences in the classroom.
Yes, in the classroom, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this critique that he has
Okay.
doesn't stop at schools.
Mm.
It extends to the workplace as well.
Okay.
He argues that the modern workplace, with its focus on,
Yeah.
emotional intelligence,
Right.
can actually disadvantage men
Okay.
who might be more inclined towards
Yeah.
logic and directness.
So there's a mismatch there
There is a mismatch.
in his view.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he also criticizes things like affirmative action
Mhm.
and diversity quotas, claiming that those can lead to
Okay.
unfair hiring and promotion practices.
So he's saying it's not creating a level playing field.
It's actually tilting the playing field
It's tilting it in the other direction.
in another direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty bold critique
It is
of
a build critique.
how things are structured now.
Yeah, of how the modern workplace operates.
Yeah. And then he doesn't just
Yeah.
limit it to those areas.
No.
Like he even goes into
He even wades into politics.
politics.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's his take there?
So he argues that feminist influence in politics
Okay.
has really skewed policies to focus heavily on women's issues while overlooking men's concerns.
So there's a blind spot there
A blind spot.
in his view.
Yes.
When it comes to men's struggles.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he specifically points to
Yeah.
the whole debate around the gender wage gap
Right.
and what he sees as a lack of attention given to issues like male suicide rates.
So he's saying there are
Real issues
issues
that are being ignored. Yeah.
And then
he saves.
if that wasn't enough,
I know, right?
he saves some of his harshest criticism
Yes.
for the family court system.
That's where things get really personal.
Yeah.
He claims there's a strong bias against men
Oh.
in divorce custody battles and domestic violence cases.
Yeah. And he uses those anecdotes like
Oh, yes.
the story of Tom,
The story of Tom is heartbreaking.
who loses everything in
Yeah.
divorce,
He loses everything
to kind of illustrate that.
to illustrate how the system can be unfair
Yeah.
to men.
So we've gone from like this broad
We've gone from this broad
societal critique
down
down to these very personal,
to the individual level.
individual level experiences.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a powerful way to structure the argument.
And then from the
And from there, he dives into what he calls
Yeah.
the science of gender differences.
Okay, so this is where he starts
Yeah.
getting into the biology.
The biology, the hard wiring of
Yeah.
men and women.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's his...
So he really emphasizes those biological differences between men and women. And he argues that they have significant implications for behavior strengths and ultimately societal roles.
Okay, so he's saying it's not.
He's saying it's not
This is a social construct.
just a social construct. There's
Yeah.
something deeper.
There's a biological basis.
There's a biological basis
Yeah.
for these differences.
And what are some of the examples that he uses?
He talks a lot about the role of testosterone
Right.
in men.
Great.
He argues that it drives
Yeah.
those classic male behaviors like
It-
competitiveness, risk-taking, aggression.
And he even goes so far as to say
He does.
that those traits,
Yeah.
while often seen as negative,
Right.
were actually essential
Essential for survival
for survival throughout human
our
history.
human history.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's kind of trying to reclaim them?
Yeah, it's like he's saying we need to understand them.
We need to understand.
The evolutionary context.
Yeah. And not just like
They just dismiss
to dismiss them as inherently bad.
as toxic masculinity.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then he gives some
He gives examples like
specific examples of how
Yeah.
he sees those traits manifesting.
he talks about men's supposed preference
Yeah.
for things and systems over people.
Okay.
And he argues that that explains why,
Mhm.
men are more represented in fields like STEM and
Yeah.
physically demanding jobs.
Yeah.
So he's looking at
So he's drawing a connection between
yes,
the
yes, so I
biology
get it.
and these broader societal patterns.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
we have.
And it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But before we
And the book doesn't stop there.
get too deep into the weeds,
Yes.
I want to step back and look at the overall message
Yeah.
because he paints kind of a bleak picture.
He does in the
Yeah.
beginning.
He paints a very bleak picture of
Right.
the state of masculinity.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just leave men hanging.
No, he doesn't.
He ends with this like call to action,
Okay.
urging men to reclaim their masculinity.
So there's a path forward
There's a path forward.
that he's laying out.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not just a diagnosis.
It's not just a diagnosis.
It's also a prescription.
It's a prescription.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things
So he encourages men.
that he encourages men to do to reclaim that masculinity?
He encourages them to embrace those traditional masculine traits that we were talking about, to find purpose and meaning in their lives, and to step into leadership roles.
Okay.
You know?
So it's about taking ownership.
Taking ownership of their lives and of their masculinity.
Instead of defining it on their own terms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not letting society define it for them.
Not letting society define it for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so he gives them kind of like...
He gives them a toolkit.
A tool.
A set of tools.
For navigating this world
Okay.
that he sees as so hostile.
And what are some of the
Some of the things he suggests are engaging
specific tools in that toolkit?
in male bonding activities,
Okay.
participating in men's groups, finding spiritual practices that resonate with them,
Okay.
and expressing themselves creatively.
So it's about like reconnecting.
But recollecting with that core.
That masculine core.
That masculine essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, this is all just a taste of what the book has to offer.
Yeah,
There's so scratch the surface here.
So much more to explore.
But it's definitely a thought-provoking book.
It is.
To say the least.
It is a thought-provoking book, and it sparked a lot of debate.
I can imagine.
You know, some people find his arguments very empowering, and other people find them very divisive and potentially harmful.
Right.
But regardless of where you stand,
I think you can't deny that it raises
it forces you to confront
some uncomfortable truths.
Some uncomfortable truths about the state of masculinity.
Yeah, about masculinity and about
in the modern world.
What we live in today.
And that's what this deep dive is all about.
Yeah, exactly. It's about digging into those complex issues and helping you form
your own conclusions.
Your own conclusions.
So we've just given you a taste snippet, but if you really want to understand what he's talking about,
you got to read the book.
You got to read the book.
You got to dive in yourself.
Turning Point.
Turning Point.
And you can find it on Amazon Kindle.
Amazon Kindle.
And Google Play Books.
Google Play Books.
Now, with that said,
I
want to go a little bit deeper into some of the book's more provocative arguments.
Okay.
And I think a good place to start is with his critique of what he calls the feminization of society and how it's impacted everything from our institutions to our personal relationships.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah. So buckle up.
Buckle up.
Yeah.
So when he talks about this feminization of society, what is he really getting at?
Yeah, it's a pretty loaded term.
It is.
So it's important to unpack it.
Absolutely. So what's he saying?
He's talking about this like perceived shift in power dynamics and cultural values.
Yeah.
He's arguing that as women have gained more rights and opportunities, traditional masculine roles and traits have been devalued, even demonized.
So it's like a zero-sum game?
Yeah, in a way.
In his view.
Yeah, he sees it as this like battle between the sexes where one side's gain is the other side's loss.
But he doesn't just keep it theoretical.
No, he ties it to these tangible changes.
In various aspects of our lives.
Give me an example.
Okay, so for example, he talks about the rise of stay-at-home dads. Now, on the surface, that seems like a positive development.
For gender equality.
For gender equality.
Right. Yeah.
But he argues that it's also blurred those traditional gender roles.
Okay.
And it's left some men feeling unsure of their place in the family structure.
So it's like those changes, while intended to create more equality, have actually created more confusion.
More confusion, more anxiety.
For some men.
Yeah, for some men, exactly.
Yeah.
And he also points to the way men are often portrayed in popular culture.
Right.
Like, think about those bumbling dad tropes that you see in sitcoms.
Right.
He's saying that those representations further undermine traditional masculinity and contribute to this sense of emasculation.
So it's those subtle messages.
Well, subtle messages.
That can have a big impact. Impact how men see themselves.
On how men see themselves and their role in society.
Yeah.
And then the book goes even deeper.
Okay.
And starts exploring like the psychological impact of this perceived feminization.
So he's saying it's not just about like external changes.
It's about what's going on internally for men.
It's affecting their...
He argues that the pressure to conform to these new expectations.
Yeah, these new, often like contradictory expectations.
Yes, contradictory expectations can lead to men suppressing their true selves. Their emotions, their natural inclinations.
So it's like they're being squeezed from all sides. They're expected to be.
They're expected to be sensitive and strong.
Right, sensitive and strong, nurturing and assertive.
Nurturing and assertive.
All while navigating this world that seems to devalue those traditional masculine traits.
Exactly.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is.
And he's saying that.
And he suggests that
this can actually manifest.
This pressure can manifest.
In negative ways.
In negative ways. Like leading men to seek validation through risky behavior, aggression, or even violence.
So it's like those negative expressions of masculinity are a result of
this pressure.
This pressure to conform.
To conform to these new expectations that don't really fit.
That don't fit who they are.
Who they are.
So it's a pretty sobering.
It's a sobering thought. But the book doesn't just dwell on the negatives. It also offers some solutions. Encouraging men to rediscover their authentic masculinity.
So how do they do that?
He emphasizes the importance of finding purpose, pursuing passions that genuinely resonate, and building strong relationships with other men who share their values.
So it's about finding your tribe.
Finding your tribe, finding your purpose, and living authentically.
Creating your own definition of what it means to be a man.
Yeah. So it's not about rejecting everything that's come before.
It's about finding what works for you.
It's about taking the best of those traditional values and adapting them to the modern world.
Creating something
new. That's true to who you are.
And that's a powerful message.
It is.
But it also kind of raises this question of how do we reconcile those individual journeys with the need for collective action? Like, how do we find our place?
How do we come together
in a world that
often seems to be?
In a world that
often a society
often feels hostile.
Yeah,
that's a big question.
That's a big question.
And the book.
And does he address that?
He does.
Okay.
He argues that men have a vital role to play in shaping a better future. Not just for themselves, but for their families and for society as a whole.
So he's not advocating for men to...
He's not saying retreat from the world.
No, he's saying engage.
He's saying engage. But engage in a
more meaningful way.
More meaningful and impactful way.
Yes. He's saying step up and lead. Not in a domineering way. But in a way that utilizes their unique strengths and perspectives.
So it's about using those masculine traits.
That he talks about.
To create positive change.
To create positive change, exactly. So don't let the challenges discourage you.
Use them as fuel.
Use them as fuel to become better, stronger, more resilient.
And how do you do that?
He suggests focusing on personal growth, building strong communities, and advocating for policies that support men and families.
There's like a multi-pronged approach. It's not just about individual change.
It's about individual and societal change working together. And it's a message that I think is going to resonate with a lot of men.
It's a message of hope.
It is.
In a lot of ways.
It is a message of hope. He's saying that these policies that were meant to create equality have actually ended up backfiring in some way.
So like what are some specific examples that he gives?
Well, he looks at things like affirmative action. And he argues that sometimes those policies have led to reverse discrimination.
Against men?
Against men, yes. Where qualified men are being overlooked.
Simply because they're men.
It's like in trying to correct one imbalance, we've created another.
It's a bit of a pendulum swing.
Exactly.
And he also talks about...
And he talks about the gender wage gap.
That's a big one.
He challenges that whole idea that women earn...
77 cents on the...
77 cents for every dollar a man earns. He argues that that statistic is misleading. Because it doesn't account for things like career choices. Hours worked, risk tolerance. He says that when you control for those factors, the gap shrinks significantly.
So he's saying it's not as simple as just outright discrimination.
Exactly. He's saying that there are other factors at play. And that the remaining disparity is largely due to personal choices.
Interesting.
So it's a very different perspective.
It is. It's a very different perspective. And I'm sure it's going to ruffle some feathers.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
And then he doesn't stop there.
No, he doesn't.
He goes on to talk about how feminist ideology has impacted
the legal system.
The legal system.
Specifically in areas like family law and domestic violence.
Okay.
And this is where things get really controversial.
Yeah.
He argues that the courts are often biased against men.
In what way?
Well, he says that in divorce cases, mothers are often favored in custody disputes and in financial settlements.
So fathers are getting the short end of the stick.
Basically, yeah. And he also talks about domestic violence cases. He claims that there's this presumption of male guilt that often leads to false accusations and unfair outcomes.
So he's saying that the system is set up in a way that disadvantages men.
In his view, yes.
Yeah.
He believes that the scales of justice are tipped.
Against men.
Against men.
Yeah.
And he provides a lot of evidence to support these claims.
Like what kind of evidence?
He cites statistics, anecdotes, legal cases.
Okay.
Expert opinions.
So he's really trying to build a strong case.
He's not just making these claims lightly.
Right.
He's backing them up with evidence.
Okay, so it sounds like he's trying to raise awareness of these issues.
Exactly. He wants men to be aware of the challenges they're facing and to be proactive in advocating for their rights.
So it's not just about complaining.
No, it's about taking action.
About pushing back against these systems that he sees as unfair.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a message that's likely to resonate with a lot of men who are feeling marginalized or silenced.
Yeah, it's definitely a provocative book. But it's one that I think is important to engage with.
I agree.
Even if you don't agree with everything he says.
Right.
It's good to challenge your own assumptions.
Absolutely.
And to consider different perspectives.
It's all about expanding our understanding of these complex issues.
And I think Turning Point does a good job of that.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It's a valuable contribution to the conversation.
Okay. So for folks who are interested in learning more and diving deeper into these issues,
you can find Turning Point.
Where can they find it?
On Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Great. So check it out.
Check it out.
Form your own conclusions.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about here at the Deep Dive.
Exactly. Challenging those assumptions.
Encouraging you to think differently.
Expanding your horizons.
Yeah.
It's all about growth.
It's all about growth.
Yeah.
So until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.